If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Now, there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
Out on our farms where our crops won't grow, they stand in lines where the livestock go. Turbines spinning, mining drills, taking our land without our will. No regard for the common hand, labor's marching on our land. Under cover of their green crusade, but we see through the games they play. To lines, mines and turbines we say no. Let the farmers grow. The whole damn state is in a rage. Our rights erased on every page. Scrap the law, scrap the lie. It's labor's hoax, we won't comply. They preach the end, they sell the fear, but the only thing they tax is near. Every drop of sweat we shed feeds their pockets, lines their beds. Victorians rise, the time is now. We'll fight back, we won't bow. This isn't green, it's their power and need, and we are done watching their greed. To lines, mines and turbines we say no. Let the farmers grow. The whole damn state is in a rage. Our rights erased on every page. Scrap the law, scrap the lie. It's labor's hoax, we won't comply. They don't speak for the working hands. They steal the soil, they steal the lands. No more lies, no more scams. Stand with the people, not labor's plans. They take the vote, then shut the gate. Push fake agendas while families break. Rural towns left high and dry, while bureaucrats sit smug and lie. To lines, mines and turbines we say no. Let the farmers grow. The people's fire has been lit. We won't back down, we won't submit. Scrap the law, scrap the lie. We'll fight for truth till labor dies. They never asked, they never cared. Just sent the bills while we despaired. But from the scrub, the people roar. Won't be slaves to labor no more. They silence voices, twist the facts, push through laws behind our backs. The fight is fierce, the truth is clear. You won't erase our voices here. To lines, mines and turbines we say no. You can't take what you didn't sow. The bush is roaring, hearts ablaze. We won't be ruled by labor's haze. Scrap the law and the spin. Let real Victorians rise again. This is our
great track. What a great way to start the show. Written by John Houston. Houston, we don't have a problem with your songwriting from the CFA there. We do have a problem with the Victorian state government. This is called Two Lines, Mines and Turbines. We say no. A lot of protesting happening in the UK. Also, the inheritance tax is about to bite, or it is biting now. The Scottish farmers have set off in a convoy to take part in the latest protest, and they're all going to meet in a few days' time in Liverpool, where they're having the Labour Party conference. Cam, could you play Liverpool?
These are just some of the tractors that are taking part in the latest protest against plans to change inheritance tax. A group started in John O'Groats, and they are basically making their way down as part of what they're calling the Tractor of Truth convoy to the Labour Party conference, which is in Liverpool. They're going to be joined by farmers there protesting from Wales and England as well. Now, this is all against the plans that Rachel Reeves announced last October to place a 20% tax on farm assets worth more than £1 million. Family farms, for example. Farmers say the margins are simply not there to allow them to pay for this tax, and that they will be pushed out of business. We've been speaking to the Treasury this week, who maintain their plans are a good one, that they will fill a multi-billion pound black hole, and they've also pointed to new funds which they are making available for farmers. Farmers say those numbers, though, simply don't add up, and if their voices aren't heard, they'll continue to protest.
Yeah, it's a truly it's a despicable thing what Starmer's doing. But look at what the Victorian or the state government, the federal governments in Australia are doing. They're not looking after the farmers. Look at the renewables, how they can walk in onto people's property willy-nilly. We've seen what's happening with the fire ants. It's just, they just come onto your property. You have no rights. And we need to make sure that farmers don't lose these rights. In the UK, they're also going through a pretty wild drought at the moment. It's leaving UK farmers scrambling to feed their herds. Cam, if you could play drought.
There is absolutely nothing here to graze for my cows. It looks dead. It will come back again, but you can see it is just dust. It is dead. There is nothing for them to pick at.
On David Barton's beef farm in the Cotswolds, Western England, months of heat and drought have left his 200 head of Solaire, Hereford and Sussex cows with nothing but parched fields. It's the result of England's driest spring in more than 100 years, and the driest January to July period since 1929. That's according to data from the UK's Met Office, which says summer 2025 will likely be the UK's warmest since records began in 1884, moving 2018 off the top spot. Customers for beef from Manor Farm, which has been in Barton's family for 3 generations, include upmarket grocer Waitrose and the restaurant chain Hawksmoor. Like many livestock farmers across England, he has had no choice but to dip into his winter feed supplies early this year, dramatically increasing his costs. Having given up on grazing 2 months ago, Barton has been feeding his cows twice a day with a mix of silage, hay and cereals to ensure they get their necessary nutrients. But his herd is still hungry and chases his tractor across the fields for more food after being fed. Barton's predicament is typical of a wider crisis for British livestock farmers, with many concerned about the welfare of their animals and financial viability amid already thin profit margins. He is spending about £1,000 a week, or $1,350, more on feed than he normally does at this time of year.
Sometimes in a dry year we might feed cattle in August, and I usually carry stocks for that, but we would have made good forage stocks earlier in the year. May and June we grow a lot of grass, and because we didn't have that opportunity this year, it's impossible to catch up. But now we're heading towards September, we won't be able to make conserved forage in the way of silage or hay this year now.
With additional production costs not generally linked to his selling price, Barton faces an expensive winter.
So there you are. It's a great life. Some years not so great. Dr. Cooper Schouten is the Senior Research Fellow at Southern Cross University in Lismore. We look at all these beautiful fields when there's no drought. They just look magnificent. A lot of them flowering, and look at just Mother Nature. It's just doing absolutely fantastic. However, if we have no bees, and this is what sort of shocks me, we've often talked about it just with friends and stuff. If you have no bees, what happens to humanity? Maybe Dr. Cooper Schouten can tell us, first of all, what happens to humanity if all the bees disappear?
Really critical role, not just in providing us honey, but also in pollinating our food crops. And some things are really obvious, like almonds, apples, avocados, blueberries, coffee, things like that. But also things that are not that obvious, like our oil seeds and things like that. For lots of vegetables.
Sorry.
Yep, you go.
Now, what's the difference between honeybees and wild bees?
Yeah, so there's lots of different native bees. So when we think of honeybees, we usually just think of one bee, Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, but there are more than 8 different species of honeybees. There's 20,000 species of bees globally. But there's a difference between bees that have escaped captivity, if you're talking about feral bees. So they're bees that are managed by beekeepers, but they've sort of left those bee boxes and they're living in the wild. So they'd be considered feral bees, whereas wild bees just encapsulate every other bee.
Never actually thought of a bee being feral. I know that they hurt when they sting, but they are essential to human life. The Australian honey industry, in terms of numbers, what's the size? How many producers, and how is the structure? Is it organised?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's about 50,000 beekeepers. We produce about 40 tons of honey every year, but we've recently had an incursion of the varroa mite. So it's a leading cause of colony losses globally. And it's expected that we're about to lose anywhere up to about 50% of our current registered businesses in the country, which is a real concern, not just for those beekeeping families, but also for the growers that are dependent on having those honeybees there to service their pollination.
Could you just go into that a little more? So you're saying we're going to lose 50% of our bees?
Yeah, 50% of registered businesses. And this is what happened in a number of other countries when that mite first turned up. It costs a lot of money to manage the bees once this mite turns up. And we've been pretty lucky here in Australia for a long time. We haven't had this problem. But a lot of growers in Australia have been benefiting from the fact that we have lots of feral bees. So those bees that have escaped captivity, they're out in the wild, they're not being managed, and the populations are super, super high. So in some places in Australia, it's up to 150 of these colonies per square kilometre. And that means that a lot of growers have had adequate pollination services. But given that this mite has now arrived, it's likely that about 95% of those feral bee populations are about to die. And so that actually puts a lot of our growing industries, there's 67 different pollination dependent crops here in Australia. And it's interesting times ahead, not just for the viability of beekeeping businesses, but also for those growers.
If they can't get the bees, so the growers can't get enough bees, and I know the answer to this, terrible grower or farmer I was, but I left when I was 18 as fast as my legs would go. But if you don't have bees, your crop most likely won't happen.
Yeah, so all crops are it's all on a continuum. So, for example, some crops like almonds, if you don't put bees there and make an effort to do so, you just won't get any almonds. However, some other crops like avocados, they'll be pollinated by lots of other things, even things at nighttime, different types of, all sorts of different bugs that are out there. So lots of different crops, they require pollination. Some of them need a lot more intensive pollination, for example, through honeybees than others. But ultimately what happens if you don't have enough bugs pollinating those flowers, then the quality and the quantity of the fruit set goes down significantly. So it's not just the volume, but also the quality of the fruit sets that are there.
Here's something, I'm really stupid. Is it just the bees that pollinate, or you mentioned other bugs do? I mean, educate me, please.
Yeah, there's so many other insect pollinators, and I guess the more that we can do to be doing pollinator-friendly farming systems, the better. There's obviously lots of different trade-offs, but there's lots of different things that pollinate our crops.
Is this mite probably the greatest threat to the Australian honeybees?
I think it is. It is globally. It is one threat. It's the leading cause of colony losses globally. For example, in America just last year, I think there was about 1.5 million colonies were lost, and it's some of the greatest losses that they've ever seen at that time. But it's not just because of that mite. There's always, we like to point the finger at one thing, and that's the reason why there's issues, but it's usually multiple interacting factors. And varroa is a big part of that, but also just the chemicals that are out there in the environment. Bees are being sprayed, we're clearing forest areas, and remember, the bees don't just feed on our crops, they need to forage on natural forest areas. So yeah, habitat degradation, climate change for beekeepers is really becoming increasingly difficult to predict the flowering of lots of different trees that are out there, and that's their fodder. And yeah, there are other pests and diseases as well. For example, one that I'm working on in Papua New Guinea, which is a project funded by ACR, the Australian government's Australian Centre for International Ag Research. It's called Tropalaelaps mites. And lots of people are not talking about Tropalaelaps mites, but they're just as bad as varroa and arguably worse.
How can we protect the Australian bee industry and horticulture? Because I mean, if these things just get out of hand, and okay, let's just go one step further. What would farming look like without bees?
Oh, I mean, I'd be pretty sad. I wouldn't know what I'd do with my weekends all of a sudden. But I think the agricultural the agricultural sector would be in dire straits if we didn't have our beekeepers there. And I think that the more that we can improve the relationships and partnerships between growers and beekeepers, so that they can both understand their needs and provide support to one another, the better. Because both beekeepers and growers have to improve relationships.
And perhaps we need to stop using all the fertilisers and insecticides, pesticides and stuff like that too, because they must be creating some sort of havoc for the honeybee.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's synergistic impacts as well, Mike. So, for example, it's not just the sprays that the bees are coming into contact with the environment. It's the fact that if I want to keep my bees alive, I need to pretty well be putting synthetic chemicals in those beehives at the moment. It's a sad truth. There are many other options. There are organic chemical controls. Also, genetics plays a really big part. But yeah, lots of things that could be done. I guess just supporting your local beekeepers is always something that's going to really help them in their back pocket to stay in business.
They're very busy people buzzing around here. I had to use that one. If somebody wants to find out more, or if a farmer is or a horticulturist, grower, whatever, or just a layperson wants to find out more about bees and how to look after their own backyard, is there a website, or can they get hold of you or the university to have a conversation? Maybe you could point them in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So we run a bee research and extension lab at Southern Cross University. We're in northern New South Wales. And yeah, if you just Google us, you can check it out online. You can sign up to our newsletter. The Australian Honeybee Industry Council is another one for that's the peak industry body here in Australia for the beekeeping industry. They're another excellent source of information.
Absolutely brilliant. I just so impressed. And I almost knew a little bit about farming. My late father, he truly... I tell you some terrible stories of my day. I am the worst, not the worst farmer, but I didn't like it. Hands got dirty and got sweaty and everything. It's just terrible. Dr. Cooper Schouten, thank you very much for your time. I'd like to do more of this because I think we can talk about other areas of looking after the land and looking after what we eat and what we need to make sure that this country remains such a great country. A pleasure, sir. Thank you very much. This is the Country Telegraph and the World Today.
Right, whole bloody national park, and you picked the spot close enough to hear me fart. Top work, champ. Righto, if I can smell your bug spray from my swag, you're too bloody close. This ain't a caravan park, Loveny. Spread out. Some of you treat car doors like you're closing a bank vault mid-robbery. If I wanted a music festival, I'd be at Tamworth. It's 10 p.m, not Coachella. Control your spawn, Sharon. I don't want to talk about the weather, Greg. Go stir your own porridge. If I didn't invite you over, I don't want to hear about your kidney stones, your ex-wife, or your bloody crypto portfolio. Don't look in me pot like you're doing a bloody audit. It's stew, Greg. Bugger off to your own camp, mate. Woo! If your little darlings are using my campsite as a racetrack, I will trip them. That's bush class with Auntie Dot. Camp with space, shut your gob after dark, and remember, Reg, it's the bush, not a bloody big four.
Bugger.
Bugger me. Easy now, son. Ooh, bugger. In front.
Bugger.
Bugger.
At Riverford, our veg is so fresh it's still in the soil. So we can't show you the 100% organic veg that we will deliver to your door because we haven't picked it yet. What we can show you is our farmer Alistair and his special talent. Delightful. Riverford, so fresh it's still in the soil.
I'm a very wicked person. I found those spots. Dr. Robert Verkerk is going, oh my Lord, do they really talk like that in Australia? Well, we do sometimes. In the bush we do. So you'll have to, when you come out here, bring a translator to understand what we've done to the English language. Robert is also founder of the Alliance for Natural Health International. We're going to talk about innovations in regenerative farming. First of all, thanks for joining us, Robert. And what is regenerative farming?
Well, Mike, I've just got to kick off by saying I loved those little spots, by the way. They were great. And as far as my ability to understand Australian, of course, that's where I cut my teeth. And I was actually in my early 20s working with some of the earliest regen farmers in Australia who were really concerned about pesticides. So I think I remember telling you that some of the work we did in the Total Environment Centre in Sydney triggered the quarantining of dairy farms in Australia because of the overuse of heptachlor and chlordane, these very persistent organochlorines that were then being used for white fringe weevil and lucerne, but then finding the way into the milk. And the New South Wales Department of Agriculture was just completely unaware of it until we did the studies that showed what was happening, and then they imposed the ban. So yeah, regen farming has really moved on. The amazing thing about it is that it is a bottom-up movement. It's a farmer-led movement. So, when we think of organic farming, again, started with farmers. It is the original form of farming, but organic farming is technically a free-from system of agriculture. You just leave certain things out, synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides. What regen ag is about is you can argue it's a more realistic proposition for more land, more farmers, more consumers that really is about working with nature rather than against it. And it's absolutely driven by farmers. It's about enhancing the ecosystem. It's about really seeing the soil. We had that wonderful piece beforehand looking at the British beef farmer. If you look at that soil, one of the things that you'll notice is very low in carbon. And a soil that's very low in carbon, in organic matter, is going to be much more prone to drought. So essentially, it's a holistic approach that works with nature. It really understands what we call ecosystem services, really building biodiversity into the farming system. It treats the soil as the basis of everything, and ultimately what it does is bring more resilience back to the farmers so they can weather bad times, whether it's through the weather, whether it's through economic times.
It's amazing how things old become new. This is really, really old and is becoming new. How widely is it practiced in countries such as the UK?
Well, it's a tiny proportion. It's 1-2% in terms of true regen. But if we look at the conversion rates, it's growing faster than any other sector. And part of the reason for that is that there's an understanding from governments, the UK government, the EU government as well, is now giving subsidies for farmers who do a whole bunch of things that are associated with regen ag. So it's one of the fastest growing sectors. What we've got to understand is that in many countries prime agricultural lands might represent, say, 20%, 25%, 30% of all the used agricultural land. So you've got this massive stock of what we might think of as less prime land, or even marginal land that hasn't been farmed well, or had been very degraded. It may be often very sensitive to certain types of farming. When people have criticized the potential for organic farming to be able to provide food for the masses, for 8-10 billion people, what we see with regen farming is it has real potential, because you can have essentially a lower productivity in that land, but you can use it, and you can also be a steward for that land. So suddenly there's an opportunity to open up, 30, 40, 50% of agricultural lands to regen ag. And that's the excitement that's happening. One of the difficulties we have is that in most countries, young people, and Mike, you talked about what happened to you when you hit 18, but a lot of young people want to be in the cities and they don't want to be out in the rural areas.
Yeah, I've got to tell you this. I mean, I've been dying to tell someone, and you're the victim here. I mean, when my father realised I really wasn't a grower or a farmer, we lived on this citrus orchard and we were surrounded by beautiful trees, magnificent oranges and stuff. And I would hop in the car and drive down to the local store to buy a carton of orange juice because I did not want to squeeze those oranges. I wasn't going to do that. That's how good a farmer I was. Now, I know that people are going, this man should be stoned. I heard that
100%.
before. I've heard it all before, so go for it. Get in line. Can you tell me about the productivity stats on the benefits of regen farming?
Well, there's more and more data coming out to show that regen ag can be more productive than even a conventional farm. It can certainly be more productive than an organic farm. So, yeah, the positive thing, very often we see in the scientific literature a distortion. So for years we had to. I mean, I was heavily involved in organic research in my time as an academic at Imperial College London, working around the world. And we were really struggling then to be able to get funding to be able to show that organic farming in certain circumstances could outperform even in yield, but certainly in nutrient density. I mean, that's again how we need to kind of refactor what we're looking for. The great thing about moving on another couple of decades is that we're now less concerned about weight, mass, volume of produce, but we're looking at nutrient density. So you can get a plant that has maybe less sugar, or a fruit that's got less sugar. It might be slightly smaller, but it is just packed full of nutrition. It has all the factors that are actually going to make a meaningful impact to getting populations healthy, to reducing the risk of cancer. And really that's what I do these days, is try and span that gap between food production systems and health, and regen ag really has that potential to be able to do that. So and another factor we've got to realize is 20 years on is we're dealing with so many lands. Probably 1/3 of all agricultural land is now degraded. So if you look at a wonderful rural landscape that's been plowed. I've just come back from Italy, and I saw in some of the areas that have been heavily farmed around Tuscany or on the Adriatic coast, they are still deep plowing in the middle of summer, and leaving that soil exposed, often applying glyphosate herbicide so that they get rid of weeds. But you can imagine what that exposure of the soil is doing with that intense sunlight in the summer. It's just wiping out the microbes, and the microbes in the soil are just as important as the microbes in the gut. We've had a recognition, in fact, that there was recognition much earlier about the value of microbiological life in the soil. It's come later that we understand that the soil and plants and humans and our guts are really mirror images of one another, and we have to really work hard to look after them.
I'll ask you another question. I've got one ready to fire away, but here's something as a byproduct of what you've just said. Where have we gone wrong?
You know, I think it's, if I can use a much used term, corporate capture has been the problem. You know, we've had major corporations dictating how we do farming. I was working in Zimbabwe on cotton organic farming systems, and we got the whole system established, and then a bunch of seed and, you know, ag companies came along and said, "Hey, look at these farmers. They're working hard to produce this organic crop, but we can give them a quick win by giving them free seed and selling them, you know, agrochemicals." And, you know, a significant number, it wasn't all of them, but it was about a third of them just bought into the lure of the money and the quick win. Um, you know, was great. 3 years later, their entire, you know, hot pepper systems that they were sold collapsed. The difference is the farmers who stayed with the organic cotton carried on. So, yeah, we've got to look at the long term. We've got to really understand. I mean, it's one of the things we're doing a lot of work in the US, looking at what's happening with the Maha movement. Again, a bottom-up driven movement. It's not being driven by the corporates. In fact, the corporates hate it. And one of the things that people like Callie Means have been saying is that he thought big pharma might be their biggest enemy, but actually big agro has been a much tougher customer for them to deal with, because they're trying to reduce the amount of chemicals going into the system. And they're trying to move everything over to Regen Ag as well. So there's a big push. And of course, Kennedy only looks after Health and Human Services, so USDA is separate. But actually, there's now a joined up link that is going on between these different departments, USDA, EPA that handles all the registration of chemicals. We've got to take a holistic system, not only in how we manage the land, but also how we manage the corporations and how we manage the regulation that manages the whole shebang. So yeah, lots of work to be done still, but as we move ever closer to an environmental crisis, you know, in on the land, one of the big crises that is not talked about enough, and of course we've just been hearing about it from Dr. Schouten, about the problem with the bees, but there is a massive biodiversity crisis. There is a free fall of all sorts of species, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of species that have often been associated with agriculture are now just collapsing. And we've got to be able to deal with that. And Regen Ag is one of the best systems we've got to be able to handle that.
Yeah, it is a if you go one step past the plate, it's actually a crisis, and we need to be more aware of this. Because you and I have spoken about other things in the past, and truly, what you say, I'm just amazed at the insight you have on many things. Tell me about, because if farmers do what they've done for the last 20 or 30 years, fertilizer, all sorts of chemicals, push the soil to its utmost, and you need to bring it back, get that gut feeling for the land better. What's the process? I mean, is it a long process? Because, I mean, with your gut, for example, the answer is pretty straightforward, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's the same. Does the same apply for land?
Yeah, you know, if we look at the human gut, for example, you know, a lot of kids grow up with course after course of antibiotics. They then eat junk food. Now that's synonymous with this idea of putting the wrong things into the soil, using intensive NKP fertilizers, but not thinking about all the other trace minerals that come often from organic sources. And applying pesticides is just like putting pharmaceuticals in the body. The long term in humans is that you massively increase your risk of autoimmune disease, of irritable bowel syndrome, of cancer, heart disease, and the rest of it. In agriculture, the worst that can happen is you create deserts. You get the dust bowls that happened in the United States. What that process is a slow process, but obviously on the way to it, there are many symptoms of disease on the land, and one of them is that you lose your ability to be resilient. So you suffer. So when we hear about the problems with climate change, um, a lot of people are still putting it down to climate as in the weather. They're not putting the climate change problem just massive changes in the nature of weathering systems, but how inadequate soil structure actually ends up, causing the primary problem that the farmers are having. So we have to build resilience. Resilience is really the definition of health, whether you're looking at human health or agricultural health. And that's one of the reasons farmers are the first people who see it. That's why Regen Ag is a farmer-led movement, because the farmers, as soon as they start to look after the land around us, just as the same as someone who starts looking after their gut, eating the right things, not eating all the time, giving it a break. Same thing we see in Regen Ag systems, using rotations, for example, using cover crops. So you're giving the land a chance to rest, the same as us having a 16-hour overnight fast. You've got to give your gut a chance to rest. That's when we start to see improvements. So exciting times ahead. We're at crisis point, but this is really one of the biggest solutions we have on the ag side, and it really does mirror a holistic approach to human health as well. And the fact that Regen Ag can produce these nutrient dense foods, which are very unlike the crap, if I can use that term, that often turns up in supermarkets. It's a different kind of food, and it's making us sick. So we got to get away from that.
Look, we have run out of time, and I'm kicking myself because I really, this is a fascinating discussion. Invitation is there, and hopefully Jen will annoy the crap out of you to come back on again. Because what you're saying is just absolutely fascinating. If somebody wants to find out more about what you're talking about, Regen Ag, how do they do that?
Well, I mean, certainly you can look at what we're doing at Alliance for Natural Health, ANHinternational.org. But there is a whole regenerative movement that we're involved with as well. So if you look up Regen Ag, whether you're in the States, in Australia, or in Europe, you'll find all sorts of links, a whole range of organizations who are involved with it. But ultimately, remember, this is a farmer-led movement. So it's about individual farmers. One of the best things any of us can do is find out who the Regen Ag farmers are in your area and buy your food from them, often at the farm gate. And that's how we sort of move away from the big supermarkets, the big hypermarkets that are really driving the conventional farming movement. Those guys are quite resistant to it. But if it's consumer-led and it's farmer-led, we've got a pincer movement that will create the transformation that we need.
Absolutely brilliant. Robert Verkerk, invitation is open. Hopefully we'll see you again very, very shortly. I think it's just absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much, sir. This is the Country Telegraph. And welcome back to the Country Telegraph. By the way, the scenery behind me is somewhere in the UK, and I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Maybe Andrew Montfort, he's the director of Net Zero Watch, might know where it is. I could almost see a barbecue set up there. Andrew, have you been there? Do you know where it is? Help me out.
Fortunately, I don't. It does look absolutely stunning, doesn't it? Yeah, and it also looks a little bit warmer than it is here in Scotland. So.
Yes, it is. Although you get a chance to wear a kilt in Scotland and drink.
Yeah, not in today's weather, I think. And I'm English.
You have lovely whiskies to get you. You have lovely whiskies to get you through such terrible
times. Helps, certainly.
Can you tell me about the Climate Change Committee and what they do?
So the Climate Change Committee is a statutory body. It was set up under the 2008 Climate Act to be the government's advisors on their decarbonisation policy. So it all sounded quite innocent when it started. These were advisors, but what they've actually turned into is a sort of a moral weapon, if you like, to say to the government, you're not doing enough, you need to go harder, you need to go faster, you need to do this, you need to do that. And governments are essentially frightened of them and are inclined to do very much as they're told. So every so often, the Climate Change Committee issues, if you like, a report on how the government's doing, and every time they say, you're not going fast enough, you're not doing enough, you need to be much harder on this group, on that group, and on the other group. They are a very dangerous operation in reality.
Who do they report to?
They report to Parliament. They put forward these reports every so often, which Parliament then debates, and ministers sort of say, "Oh yes, we will try and do what you say, or we'll do this, that, and the other," and that tends to get quite a lot of publicity.
Their report, or the latest report, was released a few months ago. Is it being implemented now? And just give us your feelings on this one.
In some ways, you know exactly what's coming, as I've alluded to before. You know what they're going to say, that we're not doing enough, and that they'll suggest a whole lot of sort of half-baked ideas that they think, I mean, I don't even know whether they actually genuinely think that they will make a difference, but that's what they do, and the government plays along with it. I mean, I'm very very cynical about the Climate Change Committee. If we go back a few years now, when they put the original net zero report out, this was advising the government that they could go to a net zero decarbonisation target. And I then spent 2 years in the courts trying to get them to release the underlying costings, because they said this could be done really cheaply, and I didn't believe them. And eventually we forced the data out of them, and we went, once we got into the data, we discovered that their costings were, I can't find a better word for it than fraudulent. I mean, they were essentially lies. This has carried on ever since. So we're currently trying to get the current version of those costings, and they're saying, we're a year after the report came out, and they're saying, we'll release them in due course, despite publicly saying that they have a commitment to transparency. I mean, it's a complete and total joke. I think as soon as we get a sensible government in power in the UK, the Climate Change Committee are toast. I mean, they just have to go. They're a disgrace.
They're recommending a slashing of meat and dairy consumption. I mean, a barbecue without meat is not a barbecue.
Absolutely. I mean,
without the lambs, not a Sunday roast.
No, absolutely. And this is what I say. These are absolutely half-baked plans. They just throw these things out there, and they will get followed up on. I mean, they will try to put policies in place that bring about that end, but they don't have any thought about the impact on farmers, on society, or anything else like that. It's just, everything gets relegated to secondary importance behind this crazy decarbonisation target, and because they have no idea whether the decarbonisation target actually makes any sort of rational sense, whether the costs of it outweigh the benefits, or vice versa. We get these crazy policies going out there, and people suffer. There is no thought given to the human suffering that these policies cause. I mean, this will close down farms. This will ruin people's livelihoods. People who've worked the same land for generations will be thrown out and said, "Oh well, we'll give you a training, learn to code or something," and they just don't care about it. It's a rather scary, sort of anti-human way of thinking that has got a grip in this country.
And a 30% reduction also in cattle and sheep. I would imagine this is, because they are emitting terrible poisonous gas called methane. And I read one report, it said the amount of methane that's going into the atmosphere is 0.003%. So, and our neighbours next door got into methane once. I think it was methane. No, it was helium. Sorry about that. They'd be dead, wouldn't they? But anyway, they sounded very funny. But this 0.003% on the actual methane, it's again part of the fear porn or the fear campaign of scaring the bejeebers out of just about anybody who can read.
Yeah, I mean, this is the perennial problem for the UK. You know, we're a small country, so you know, if you look at our population of cattle compared to countries like the USA or Argentina or somewhere, I mean, it's a drop in the ocean. And as you say, I mean, the amount of methane going out there from agriculture is tiny anyway. So a tiny proportion of a tiny proportion is minuscule. It's irrelevant. So to try and do this, it doesn't seem rational, does it? And I think that at the bottom of it is what the problem is. It isn't a rational thing. It's about middle class environmentalists being able to virtue signal, and so they put these campaigns out saying we have to get rid of the cattle, and it's that Puritan thing, isn't it? We have to suffer a bit. Life's too good. We need to suffer a bit because that will be good for us. And so they're out there making sure that there are some people out there who are suffering. Now, of course, the middle classes can probably cope with this. At the end of the day, it's going to be the poor people who are not going to be able to afford to eat meat anymore. Whereas, the comfortable, academics or whatever who push these policies, they'll be absolutely fine. And I think this is why British society is so edgy at the moment, because I think there are a lot of people out there who are just looking at all these policies that are coming through on net zero, and they're just going, this is not about making our lives better. It's about making, the wealthy feel better. That's a recipe for revolution, really.
And I always say that I think time is, whether it's what sort of revolution, I don't know, but we need to do something, because I say to people and they go, oh, no, we're going to win this battle. We're like little outpost, and this giant steamroller's coming towards us. We've got two choices. You can get out the road or get run over, but you've got to make sure you fight. And this, as we wind up, we've got about 3 minutes to go. This is all about winding back agriculture, winding back the farmer, getting rid of farmers. And if government has its way, and if you look at 6,000 farms in the UK last year, just vanished. They're well underway to achieving their ultimate aim, and that's to just completely mess up UK farming.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know whether you've talked about this previously, but obviously we've had the changes to the inheritance tax laws around farming, and which I think is going to take a lot of family farms out of the family. And I mean, I think there is a big suspicion that big agriculture is all sort of BlackRock and people like that are sort of sitting on the sidelines waiting to take over. And that is extremely worrying. I think we have a very short window to fix that. We're going to need a change of government that is. And a change of government to one that can actually be radical on this, because there are going to be we're going to need very radical policies to reverse this, to give us the financial headroom to be able to say to the farmers, right, okay, we're going to put those inheritance laws back in place, because we have no money. So that's why, I think that's the primary reason the government has done it, is because they want to, they need the money. And if you're going to reverse that, we've got to cut spending somehow. And that needs radicalism, because we've had 20, 30 years of governments who refuse to cut spending under any circumstances. So, it's a very, very difficult situation we're in.
Yeah, government, whether it's UK or New Zealand, Australia. In Australia, they've got all these big windmills being plonked all over the place. New big power lines to carry the renewable energy, which sometimes works. And the farmer has really little say in these things going up, and government access to the land and stuff. And it shows you that the lack of regard for fellow human beings and farmers is just deplorable. And the same thing in the UK. Andrew, we've got to go. We just have run out of time. But If somebody wants to find out more about Net Zero Watch, they can do it at netzerowatch.com. What about on other socials?
We are on Facebook under Net Zero Watch. We've got a YouTube channel which we put clips of me talking on radio shows and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's the way to find us. And we are Net Zero Watch on X. That's probably our biggest social. So yeah, we're all over the place.
You are, and so is the government, but I like your way. Your way all over the place is much more kinder. Andrew Montfort, Director of Net Zero Watch, thank you very much for your time, and we'll do this again not too far down the track. This is the Country Telegraph, but now coming up next, The World Today.